I know that that is something that is reserved for the most serious of cases, and I believe that this case rises to that level.
The courtroom was thick with tension as a young man stood to hear his fate. Shondell was barely 19 when he was found guilty of first-degree homicide and robbery. His victim, Nathan Potter, had been a promising university student, his future bright until a senseless act of violence snuffed it out. The details were chilling. Nathan was merely walking home when Shondell and his accomplice, Derek, cornered him, demanded money. And when he had none, Shondell pulled the trigger without hesitation. Through his trial, Shondell's cold indifference pierced the hearts of Nathan's grieving family. He smirked, gestured mockingly, and even smiled at them as they poured out their pain in court. Nathan's mother, Denise, spoke of the pure evil she saw sitting across from her, while his father, James, implored the judge to ensure Shondell would never again walk free to hurt another innocent soul. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom as she sentenced him to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. It was then that Shondell's mask slipped, revealing a face twisted with hatred as he turned to glare at Nathan's family. A female officer attempted to restrain him, forcing his head forward, but he resisted. The sound of sobbing filled the room, an unbearable soundtrack to this grim moment. Whether the sobs came from Shondell's family or Nathan's was unclear, but grief knows no sides. The scene devolved further when a scream shattered the tense air. Shondell erupted, shoving back against the officers, his fury ignited. The table before him scraped against the floor as he struggled, and it took several officers and even pepper spray to subdue him. Shondell's family cried out in support, their wails filling the space as their son was forced back to his feet, handcuffed and defiant. As he was dragged from the courtroom, his mother's anguished cries echoed, blaming the family of the boy he had killed, as if they were responsible for the consequences her son now faced. Nathan's mother later described how terrifying it had been for her youngest daughter to sit in that courtroom, afraid that Shondell might try to harm them even there. The wounds inflicted on her family would never heal, yet she still clung to a fragile hope that, in the cold isolation of a prison cell, Shondell might one day comprehend the value of a human life. Derek, the accomplice, had already accepted his fate, pleading guilty and receiving a 12-year sentence. But Shondell's violent courtroom outburst would go viral, becoming a chilling reminder of a life forever ruined by his own hand.
Donta Wright sat in court smiling and nearly laughing as a mother shed tears for her son shot and killed by Wright.
I've lost laughter and love. I no longer have the hope of having grandchildren. I've lost the enjoyment of holidays and birthdays and of everyday life.
Wright addressed the court showing no remorse.
I just want to tell y'all, I'll be home soon. R.I.P. Keon, I love my family.
In another courtroom, a similar scene unfolded. Donta Wright, a teenager from Ann Arbor, Michigan, stood before the judge, his fate also hanging in the balance. Unlike Shondell, Donta had admitted to his crime from the start. He and two friends had attempted to rob Jordan Klee, a beloved high school football player, at gunpoint. That robbery ended with Jordan dead, his promising future ripped away in a moment of greed. During his hearing, Donta answered questions with a calm detachment that belied the gravity of his actions. As the details of the crime surfaced, Jordan's mother sat nearby, her tears a silent testament to the depth of her loss. Donta described how he had pointed the gun, how the shot had been fired, and how he had taken a young man's life. Yet through it all, remorse seemed foreign to him. When it came time for victim impact statements, Jordan's family poured their hearts out. His mother was too overcome to speak, so a family member read her words. They spoke of a future stolen, of holidays forever darkened, of a mother's grief that no words could soothe. But as they spoke, Donta smiled. It was a cold, infuriating smile that seemed to mock their suffering. The judge, noticing his lack of respect, considered throwing out the sentencing agreement, frustrated by Donta's behavior. She warned him that he could face a harsher sentence if taken to trial, a life spent behind bars with no possibility of release. Still, Dante remained unmoved. When given a chance to address the court, he offered no apology. Instead, he casually mentioned he'd be home soon, showing more concern for his own freedom than the life he had taken. The judge was visibly disgusted, reminding him that while he might yet live, the boy he had killed would never again wake up, never again embrace his family. For Jordan's loved ones, the loss was a constant, inescapable nightmare. His mother spoke of sleepless nights haunted by her son's voice, of questions that would never be answered, of a pain that no sentence could erase. Though the family longed for closure, they chose not to pursue a trial, accepting a sentencing agreement to begin the long, painful process of healing. In the end, Dante was sentenced to 23 to 50 years in prison for armed robbery and second-degree murder. His defense attorney tried to excuse his smiling as a nervous reaction, not intended as disrespect. But for Jordan's family, the damage was done. The loss of their son was permanent, and the image of his killer's smirk would forever be burned into their memory.
You have 3 warrants for armed robbery and 1 warrant for felony murder.
An apparently shocked Frenetia Torres threw glares at her 2 co-defendants, Nicholas Evans and Khalil Miller, before the magnitude of her situation seemed to settle in.
Those are the charges that are pending right now.
Miller seemed surprised too by a second armed robbery charge. Evans had taken it all in by the time his charges were read. All 3 are accused in the murder of William Tunches near a trail off North Cliff Drive last week.
The third story was no less harrowing. William Tunches, a 21-year-old man from Atlanta, was lured into a deadly trap by teenagers who saw his life as nothing more than a payday. Frenetia Torres, just 17 years old, had been the bait. She knew William had a crush on her, and along with her friends Nicholas Evans and Khalil Miller, she used that to her advantage. They promised him intimacy in exchange for $300, arranging a meeting in a secluded wooded area. What William didn't know was that he was walking into an ambush. When he arrived, Nicholas pulled a gun, demanding money, while Khalil attacked him with a stick. A struggle broke out. William, desperate to survive, fought back, trying to wrestle the weapon away. In the chaos, the gun discharged, the bullet striking William. The group then rifled through his belongings, taking anything of value, before fleeing into the night. Khalil, cold and calculating, returned later to make sure William was dead. The next day, William's body was discovered. The police initially had no leads. There was no identification on him and no clear motive. But witnesses soon came forward, placing Frenetia, Nicholas, and Khalil at the scene. Piece by piece, the story unraveled. The 3 teens were arrested and charged. Both Nicholas and Khalil confessed. Frenetia, however, remained silent, convinced that her hands had remained clean enough to spare her from serious consequences. But when her charges were read in court, felony murder, armed robbery, her face betrayed her shock. Eyes wide, she shook her head as if unable to comprehend how her actions had led to this moment. Khalil seemed equally bewildered by the weight of the charges, while Nicholas remained expressionless, perhaps already resigned to his fate. William's death had sent shockwaves through his community. A well-attended service was held in his memory, with family and church members grieving not just for his loss, but for the senselessness of it all. It wasn't just about losing a young man with so much potential. It was about the staggering realization that teenagers had orchestrated this crime for a few $100s. Investigators found that this wasn't their first offense. The trio had been involved in other robberies, including one just days before William's murder. These weren't kids who had made a tragic, one-time mistake. They were on a path of escalating violence. The case dragged on, buried in the complexities of the legal system. Years passed without a public trial, yet the charges hung over them like a sentence already passed. For Khalil, as the only legal adult among them, the future looked particularly grim. His age meant he would face the harshest penalties, but none of them were likely to walk away free. The weight of their choices would follow them for the rest of their lives. For William's family, the tragedy wasn't just about a life lost. It was about 3 more lives now wasted, spiraling into the void of the justice system. His loved ones spoke of the bitter reality that in losing William, the community had also lost 3 other young people to violence, stupidity, and greed. Yet the aftermath left lingering questions. How had these teenagers reached a point where taking a life seemed worth it for a few dollars? What drove Phoenicia to manipulate someone's feelings for such a cruel setup? These weren't answers anyone was likely to get. In the courtroom, amidst the chaos of hearings and charges, no amount of legal procedure could explain the human cost. The families of both the victim and the perpetrators would have to live with that silence. As these stories unfolded, a grim pattern emerged. Young lives wasted on impulsive violence, with no comprehension of the consequences until it was too late. In each case, the reactions of the killers to their sentences revealed a chilling disconnect. Shondel's violent outburst, Dante's smug indifference, Phoenicia's stunned disbelief, all of them shared the same root: a failure to understand, or perhaps to care, about the sanctity of human life. For the victims' families, the courtrooms became arenas of heartbreak where they watched their children's killers show no remorse, no acknowledgement of the devastation they had caused. The sentences were handed down, but closure remained elusive. Shondel would never leave prison. Dante faced decades behind bars. Phoenicia, Nicholas, and Khalil awaited their fates, their freedom slipping further away with every passing year. Justice in the eyes of the law might have been served, but for the families left behind, no sentence could bring back what had been taken. They were left with memories, with empty chairs at the dinner table, and with the haunting knowledge that their loved ones had been reduced to casualties of someone else's recklessness. In the end, these were stories of loss on all sides. Communities shattered, families grieving, and young perpetrators locked away, their potential squandered by their own choices. There were no victories here, only lessons written in blood and tears. And yet in courtrooms across the country, similar stories would continue to play out, as the cycle of violence showed no signs of stopping.